It began on a crisp autumn morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Texas. The homeowner had always been patriotic, proudly displaying flags at national holidays. But this year, he wanted something bolder, something that would honor tradition, make a statement, and stand as a proud symbol in his front yard. The idea of installing a tall flagpole had been on his mind for months. He imagined the American flag waving high above his property, visible from the street, commanding attention and inspiring admiration. The property itself was modest, with a manicured lawn, a few flower beds, and a driveway leading to a two-car garage. Yet, despite its unassuming size, it was the perfect canvas for a statement piece. The homeowner researched everything: regulations, structural requirements, and materials that could withstand the harsh Texas winds. Blueprints were sketched, measurements carefully calculated, and plans prepared. Every detail mattered. The goal was not just to erect a flagpole, it was to create a landmark. Excitement turned attention when the HOA entered the picture. The neighborhood, like many others, had strict rules about property modifications, and the homeowner knew that any large structure required approval. The HOA's board was notorious for enforcing minor infractions with a zealous hand, issuing warnings and fines over trivial matters. The homeowner, however, believed in standing up for his rights. He submitted the initial application, fully expecting pushback, but hoping reason would prevail. The reply arrived in a crisp, formal letter that seemed designed to intimidate. The HOA cited vague clauses about excessive structures and visual disruptions to the neighborhood aesthetic. The wording was deliberate. It left room for interpretation, for harassment, for arbitrary enforcement. According to them, the proposed flagpole violated both the height restrictions and community harmony clauses. What had been a simple project now became a challenge, a battle of wills, and the first spark of a story that would capture the attention of the entire street. The homeowner felt a mix of frustration and resolve. It wasn't just about a flagpole. It was about freedom, about property rights, and about resisting arbitrary control. He had neighbors who had quietly complied with the HOA's whims for years, fearing fines, legal letters, and late-night inspections. Many had abandoned simple improvements, trimmed flowers differently, or avoided painting their homes boldly. The homeowner realized that this flagpole was more than a personal statement. It was a test of authority and courage. Research became his weapon. The homeowner pulled out municipal codes, state property laws, and records of previous disputes within the HOA. He discovered that, legally, there was no restriction on a single flagpole of the proposed height. The HOA's rules were limited to aesthetic guidelines, but the language was nebulous, lacking enforcement clarity. Armed with this knowledge, he began drafting a strategy, a plan that would honor his patriotic vision while preparing to defend it against the HOA's predictable objections. Preparations began in earnest. Materials were ordered: steel poles capable of withstanding gale force winds, reinforced bases, and secure anchors. The logistics alone were monumental. A crane would be needed, permits obtained, and the construction timed precisely to avoid conflicts with the HOA's routine inspections. Every step was meticulously documented. Photos were taken, emails recorded, and plans stored for reference. This was no ordinary project. It was a preemptive strike, a carefully orchestrated declaration of intent. As the days passed, murmurs began in the neighborhood. Some neighbors expressed admiration for the homeowner's initiative, while others whispered warnings about the HOA's enforcement tendencies. The board had a reputation for targeting those who dared to challenge their authority. Yet, this tension only reinforced the homeowner's determination. The flagpole was no longer merely a personal project. It was a symbol of resistance, of the right to make choices on one's own property. The first signs of opposition came subtly. A letter arrived, reiterating the HOA's objection, citing vague community standards, and hinting at penalties if the homeowner proceeded without approval. It was a calculated move. They wanted to instill doubt, to discourage action, without triggering an outright confrontation. But the homeowner was prepared. Every prior correspondence, every research document, and every legal citation had been organized into a digital and physical file. Knowledge, he understood, was the ultimate shield against arbitrary authority. Determined, the homeowner continued planning. The blueprint evolved from a simple flagpole to an engineering marvel. designed to be both visually striking and fully compliant with all relevant laws. A team was consulted to ensure stability, safety, and resilience. In private, the homeowner calculated the pole's height meticulously, aiming not just to meet expectations but to surpass them to make a statement that could not be ignored. The first chapter of this struggle ended with anticipation rather than completion. While the neighborhood slept peacefully, the homeowner surveyed the property under the soft light of dusk. The imagined flagpole seemed almost to rise in his mind, towering above the houses, a testament to resolve, research, and careful preparation. The HOA's letters and warnings rested unopened on the counter, a challenge waiting to be met, a conflict waiting to unfold. The tension was palpable. What started as a simple display of patriotism had evolved into a battle for property rights, personal expression, and neighborhood influence. The stakes were no longer merely aesthetic. They were legal, social, and symbolic. The homeowner had drawn a line in the sand, signaling that compliance would not be dictated by fear or bureaucracy. And so, as night fell over the quiet streets of the neighborhood, a plan began to crystallize, a plan that would escalate the conflict, capture attention, and ultimately transform a simple front yard flagpole into a story that would be remembered by everyone on the block. The following week began with quiet determination. The homeowner's plan had shifted from concept to action, and the first tangible steps toward building the flagpole were underway. Supplies arrived in a steady stream, reinforced steel poles stacked neatly along the driveway, a heavy-duty base ready for installation, and a series of anchors designed to secure the structure against even the strongest Texas winds. Each piece was carefully inspected, documented, and photographed. Nothing would be left to chance. Neighbors took notice almost immediately. Some peered over fences, curious but hesitant to interfere, while others whispered about potential conflicts with the HOA. The homeowner remained maintaining focus on the work at hand. Every measurement was double-checked, every alignment recalculated, and every anchor point secured according to engineering standards. The goal was simple: erect the tallest, most resilient flagpole in the neighborhood without leaving the HOA any legitimate reason to intervene. However, as expected, the HOA did not remain silent. Within 2 days, a formal notice appeared on the front door, their distinctive letterhead announcing that the project had not received board approval and that proceeding could result in escalating fines. The tone was stern but deliberately vague, designed to provoke anxiety rather than provide clarity. It referenced unspecified community standards and hinted at legal action should the homeowner continue. It was, in essence, a warning shot, signaling that the board intended to assert control at every step. Rather than intimidate him, the letter galvanized the homeowner. He meticulously organized a response, compiling all documentation, permits, and municipal code references to prove compliance. He began creating a timeline of events, recording every delivery, every inspection, and every communication with the HOA. The process transformed the project from a simple construction task into a comprehensive case study of his rights as a property owner. Each photograph of the materials and installation steps became a piece of evidence, a shield against the HOA's vague threats. Construction began in earnest. Heavy machinery was brought onto the property, and the base of the flagpole was installed with precision. Concrete was poured and reinforced, a process that required patience, expertise, and careful attention to detail. The homeowner wanted every aspect documented, knowing that even minor errors could be exploited. As the sun set each day, the skeletal structure of the pole began to rise, casting long shadows across the lawn and signaling to neighbors that this project was progressing despite opposition. Predictably, whispers and complaints began circulating. Some neighbors quietly expressed admiration, while others, concerned about HOA enforcement, attempted to dissuade the homeowner. Yet, he remained focused. He knew that once the pole was fully erected, it would stand as both a physical and symbolic victory. The initial resistance from the HOA only underscored the importance of persistence. Every minor confrontation became a learning opportunity, helping him anticipate the board's next moves. By the midweek mark, the pole had grown taller than any structure in the immediate neighborhood. Its height was impressive, commanding attention and drawing subtle stares from passers. The homeowner paused to admire the work, carefully photographing the progress from multiple angles. Every measurement, every anchor point, and every reinforcement beam was meticulously recorded. This was no longer just a flagpole, it was a statement of defiance, an engineered monument to property rights, and a challenge to the HOA's authority. The board responded quickly. Another notice arrived, this time escalating the language. Fines were threatened, legal action hinted at, and references to unspecified neighborhood covenants were cited. The homeowner, undeterred, cataloged each communication. He cross-referenced the HOA's claims with municipal codes, state laws, and previous cases of disputes in the neighborhood. Every attempt by the board to intimidate him only provided more material for his growing dossier of evidence. During the process, the neighborhood became a stage. Passersby slowed to observe the rising structure, some recording videos, others taking photographs. The homeowner noticed subtle shifts in the social dynamic, whispers of admiration, cautious nods, and even some private messages from neighbors offering support. The project, once a solitary effort, began to draw a silent coalition of witnesses. People were noticing the tension between personal property rights and HOA overreach, and curiosity was turning into quiet solidarity. As the weekend approached, the final sections of the flagpole were delivered. A crane was scheduled for the following morning to complete the installation, and safety protocols were rigorously reviewed. The homeowner coordinated with the team to ensure that everything would be executed flawlessly. Every move was documented, every angle photographed, and every step timed. This was no longer merely about erecting a structure. It was about creating an irrefutable record of compliance and intent. Late Sunday evening, the crane arrived, and the flagpole was hoisted into its final position. The sheer scale of the structure dwarfed the surrounding homes, casting long, imposing shadows across the lawn. The homeowner stood back, surveying the result. The tallest flagpole in the neighborhood, fully compliant, fully documented, and undeniably imposing. Every anchor secured, every reinforcement in place, and every precaution taken. The stage had been set. That night, as the neighborhood slept, the HOA faced a dilemma. The pole was complete. The homeowner had left no loopholes for enforcement without risking legal exposure. The board's authority, once unchallenged, was now confronted with undeniable fact. The physical manifestation of the homeowner's resolve stood tall in the yard, a symbol of defiance, preparation, and careful strategy. The first strike had been executed successfully. The pole was up, legal compliance documented, and neighborhood attention secured. The homeowner knew this was just the beginning. The HOA's response would come, and escalation was inevitable. But the battle lines were clear, and for the first time, the homeowner held the high ground. With a flagpole now towering above the neighborhood, the dynamics of power had shifted. The homeowner had not only completed the project, but he had done so meticulously, documenting every bolt, anchor, and permit in an organized dossier that left the HOA with very little room for legal maneuvering. Still, the board was far from conceding. Their letters grew more frequent, more urgent, and increasingly desperate in tone. Threats of fines escalated from hundreds to thousands of dollars. References to obscure bylaws were stretched to absurd lengths, and the hint of litigation loomed ominously over every communication. Neighbors watched silently from their windows, noticing the tension in the air. Some admired the audacity, while others feared repercussions. The homeowner, aware of this unspoken attention, doubled down on his documentation efforts. Every interaction with the HOA, emails, letters, phone logs, was cataloged, timed, and cross-referenced against municipal codes. The more the board escalated, the more evidence he accumulated, and the more his position strengthened. The HOA, frustrated by their inability to enforce the removal of the pole, attempted a more subtle form of intimidation. Notices were sent warning that the structure decreased. Property values are posed a hazard, despite no complaints from neighbors and no inspection findings supporting these claims. The homeowner countered each notice with a detailed response, including structural assessments, insurance coverage, and neighborhood surveys. Each rebuttal was filed and stored, forming an impenetrable shield against the board's tactics. Meanwhile, whispers throughout the community began to grow louder. Passersby stopped to observe the towering pole, some taking pictures, others recording videos. Social media posts began to circulate, sharing images of the massive, gleaming structure and the story behind its creation. Slowly but surely, the narrative shifted from a homeowner defying the HOA to a community watching the battle unfold. Even residents who had once supported the board silently now found themselves questioning authority. The homeowner understood the strategic advantage. By documenting every step and allowing the neighborhood to witness the process, he had turned the board's attempts at intimidation into public relations disasters. The taller the pole became, the more the HOA looked unreasonable. The homeowner had turned compliance and preparation into leverage. Every overreach by the board became a clear, visible symbol of their obsession with control rather than community well-being. Undeterred, the HOA tried another tactic. A certified letter arrived, stating that the structure violated aesthetic guidelines and demanded immediate removal. The homeowner studied the document carefully, noting that no previous guidelines had been cited. No board meeting had ever approved such a claim, and no enforcement procedures had been followed. It was clear. The board was grasping at straws, hoping fear might sway him into compliance. Recognizing the moment as a critical turning point, the homeowner escalated his own efforts. He reached out to legal counsel, familiar with HOA disputes, presenting the meticulously organized dossier of correspondence, permits, and structural assessments. Legal experts confirmed that the HOA's claims were weak at best and unenforceable at worst. The homeowner now had professional validation for every step taken, transforming his personal battle into a fortified legal position. The board, sensing that their threats were ineffective, attempted to mobilize neighbors against him. Anonymous complaints, rumors of safety hazards, and allegations of non-compliance circulated within the community. However, the homeowner had anticipated this as well. He maintained a transparent record of every action, visible to anyone who asked. The truth was indisputable. Permits were secured, inspections passed, and neighbors were largely supportive. The board's attempts to sway public opinion only served to highlight their desperation. By midweek, the community had begun to rally quietly around the homeowner. Some neighbors offered assistance with minor maintenance, others documented their own positive experiences, and a few started compiling testimonials regarding the flagpole's safety and the homeowner's adherence to neighborhood regulations. The once intimidated residents were now witnesses to a story that could not easily be denied. The HOA, growing more frantic, held a special meeting to discuss escalating enforcement. Internal communications revealed their panic. The homeowner's compliance, combined with neighborhood support, meant that any aggressive action could result in lawsuits or public embarrassment. The board debated fines, legal notices, and even attempts to revise community bylaws to retroactively claim violations. Each idea was riskier than the last. The homeowner, fully aware of the looming escalation, continued documenting everything. Photos of the pole against the evening sky, videos of neighbors' reactions, and detailed logs of all correspondence created a narrative that was as visually compelling as it was legally sound. The structure itself became a symbol. It was no longer just steel and anchors, but a beacon of preparation, resistance, and meticulous strategy. As the weekend approached, the tension between the board and the homeowner reached a peak. Another letter arrived, more desperate and aggressive than previous ones, threatening immediate legal action. The homeowner, however, remained calm, knowing that the HOA had overplayed its hand. Each threat only strengthened his position in the court of public opinion, and every neighbor observing the saga was quietly taking note. By the end of the week, it was clear. The first attempt to intimidate had failed, and the homeowner's strategy had shifted the power dynamic. The HOA was on the defensive, unsure how to proceed without risking exposure or backlash. The flagpole stood taller than ever, not just as a physical structure, but as a monument to strategy, foresight, and resolve. The homeowner's careful planning had turned the board's attempts at control into a series of missteps they could not recover from. The stage was set for the next phase. The HOA would not stop at words alone, and the homeowner anticipated further attempts at escalation. But he had prepared for every eventuality, fortified both legally and socially, and his neighborhood was beginning to recognize that the story was far from ordinary. The battle lines were drawn, and the tension in the air signaled that the next move would be decisive. The weeks following the flagpole's completion were marked by a growing tension that stretched across the quiet suburban streets. The homeowner had turned the structure into more than a personal victory. It had become a focal point for the community. Every morning, cars slowed as drivers passed by. Neighbors lingered at sidewalks, and social media posts shared images of the towering pole. In a sense, the structure itself was doing more than standing tall. It was telling a story that no HOA letter or meeting could erase. The HOA board, now acutely aware that their intimidation tactics were failing, began to make errors born of panic. Letters were sent to residents who had expressed subtle support, accusing them of condoning a violation. Meetings intended for governance devolved into arguments over the homeowner's pole, with board members contradicting one another and contradicting previous statements. It was clear that their authority was eroding, and each misstep only strengthened the narrative of overreach. The homeowner recognized an opportunity in the chaos. While continuing to document every communication and maintain the structural integrity of the flagpole, he began reaching out, subtly, to neighbors. He didn't need to rally them overtly. The evidence spoke for itself. By sharing timelines of letters, permits, inspections, and photographs of the pole's construction, he allowed residents to see the facts clearly. Many who had been quiet or hesitant began to voice support. Quietly at first, and then more openly. Word spread fast. One neighbor posted images on a community forum, highlighting the homeowner's compliance and the board's increasingly absurd claims. Another filmed a drone video of the flagpole, capturing its height and the surrounding neighborhood, and shared it with local online groups. Each post, each share, added to the momentum. The story was no longer confined to the property line. It was taking on a viral life of its own. The HOA, desperate to regain control, tried a new tactic, claiming the pole created a safety hazard for pedestrians and vehicles. They cited obscure guidelines about visibility, distances, and hypothetical wind loads. The homeowner, anticipating this, had already obtained structural assessments and safety certificates from licensed engineers. Each claim made by the board was countered with precise, irrefutable evidence. As the homeowner presented these facts to the neighborhood, he noticed a subtle but significant change in the community's attitude. People who had once deferred to the board's authority began questioning decisions more critically. Sidewalk conversations shifted from casual complaints about regulations to pointed discussions about transparency, fairness, and accountability. The homeowner's battle had illuminated a larger issue. The neighborhood's compliance had long been enforced more by fear than by reason. Small acts of solidarity began to appear. Residents helped maintain the landscaping around the base of the flagpole, offering to paint, trim, and beautify the area. Others volunteered to record the board's public meetings, ensuring that conversations were documented accurately. The homeowner, careful not to direct these actions overtly, encouraged them simply by continuing to act transparently and responsibly. The effect was undeniable. The neighborhood was slowly coalescing into a community of witnesses and participants rather than passive bystanders. The HOA, feeling the mounting pressure, escalated their attempts yet again. Threats of fines multiplied. Legal letters were sent en masse, and references to past violations were dredged up. However, each threat became less effective, as neighbors began openly questioning the legitimacy of the claims. In essence, the board's power relied on isolation, secrecy, and fear. Once transparency entered the picture, their authority weakened dramatically. Even media attention began to surface. Local news outlets picked up the story after posts and videos circulated widely online. The homeowner's careful documentation of permits, safety inspections, and community support painted a picture that was difficult to misrepresent. Interviews and stories framed the situation not as a rebellious act, but as a homeowner standing up to unreasonable authority while ensuring compliance and safety. The flagpole, already a symbol of personal determination, now represented civic courage and the assertion of property rights. The board attempted to counter this shift by calling a special HOA meeting, hoping to intimidate the homeowner and intimidate supportive neighbors into silence. The homeowner, anticipating the tactic, prepared an organized presentation. Timelines of correspondence, permits, inspection reports, photos, and even drone footage demonstrating both compliance and the pole's minimal impact on the neighborhood. Attendees were provided with clear, documented evidence that directly refuted the board's claims. At the meeting, the board's authority unraveled further. Neighbors asked questions, referenced documented proof, and challenged inconsistent claims. Where once the board's word had been final, it now faced scrutiny at every turn. The homeowner, calm and methodical, allowed the evidence to speak for itself. The meeting, intended as a show of power by the HOA, became a demonstration of the collective strength of informed, united residents. By the end of the week, the impact was undeniable. Residents were no longer intimidated by letters or threats. The flagpole had become more than a tall structure. It was a rallying point, a visual reminder of what could be achieved with patience, documentation, and strategic action. The homeowner's foresight and careful planning had turned a personal project into a catalyst for community empowerment. As Chapter 4 concluded, the tension remained, but the momentum had shifted decisively. The HOA's ability to enforce compliance through fear had been undermined, and the neighborhood was slowly asserting its voice. The homeowner understood that the next steps would determine whether the board could recover or if their authority would continue to erode under the weight of public scrutiny and legal preparation.